Chris, welcome to the show. Hi.
Hey, Greg. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you. Nice to talk with you too.
Hey, I just wanted to say as well, I came to Christ when I was 19 years old through the use of apologetics. I am now in my third semester of college, and if it wasn't for the training I had in apologetics, I don't think my faith would have lasted.
Wow.
So I just want to say that if you're thinking of sending someone to rethink apologetics, it's definitely a good idea.
Wow. Good. Well said.
Yeah. But anyways, my question kind of segues off of that. Like I said, I'm in my third semester of college, and I'm taking a class on late Rome and medieval humanities. And we've been in the semester for about a month now, and we've spent all our time learning thus far basically how the professor believes that the Old is a bunch of nonsense. He argues that it was a...
Wait, you blanked out there for a minute. Cut out. Would you say Old Testament is a bunch of nonsense?
Yes, that's what we've been studying so far. His basic idea is that it was put together as a means of propaganda during the Babylonian exile to kind of control the people there. And the first paper I write for the class was on this idea. He gave us some biblical passages in the Old Testament, and the only sources we were allowed to use were the notes that we took during his lectures, and also a textbook.
Goodness gracious. Are you kidding me?
No, and also the textbooks, which he's actually the author of. And so given those presuppositions and the data that we are allowed to use, the only conclusion that we can really draw out of it is the conclusion that he's already argued in class. And the thesis that he gave us was how has the Hebrew view of God in the Old Testament evolved? And basically the only conclusion is they began worshiping a volcano and then ended up changing a lot of it to use as a means of control for the Israelites in Babylon.
Kind of like the way his lectures and his testing is a means of controlling your own thinking, huh?
Yeah, very astute, yeah, basically.
Yeah.
But my question is but the essay I have is due tomorrow, and what I basically did is I did the assignment as he said, and then on the end of it, I did a page break, and I put a heading, said, this is not part of my essay, and I gave a response to what I had written. And looking ahead, after we leave the Old Testament, we move on to study Osiris and Horus and Mithras, and then we finally get to Jesus.
Yeah.
And it looks like we have to write another paper on Jesus, and I can kind of see where things are headed.
Yeah.
I was just looking for some general advice, not so much on how you deal with the arguments, but how you might deal with the class to maybe bring some light in the dark place that it is.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. This is well, if it's not pertaining to the content proper, but how you deal with the class. If you have a hostile professor that doesn't, basically it's my way or the highway, I'm not sure what you can do in the class proper. It might turn out that you can have conversations with students outside of class and point out that he's giving one side of the argument. This, by the way, is an informal fallacy called special pleading, where you give only the evidence that supports your view, and you disregard the evidence that goes against your view. So the way you've structured the question, I'm not sure what I could say to you. It does, what you can do with the class other than refute the ideas of the professor. That sounded like the way you asked it. Is that right?
Right. Well, let me ask this. I'm going to turn in my paper tomorrow, and I don't know how he's going to react to me basically responding to what I wrote, and it's kind of informally coming after the ideas he's presented. If he were to basically, if he were to force me to play along with his ideas, do you think it would be smart to just drop the class altogether, or just kind of write papers on what I don't believe?
No. Well, there's a couple ways you can go here. I wouldn't necessarily drop the class. What you're getting in the class is you're getting a good education on how the other side thinks. And to go along with his assignment, that is, please regurgitate what I told you happened. Please revisit all of my own views. It just forces you then to get his views correctly. So this is an education for you that's valuable. You see how they think. You've been there, done that. You understand it, so you're not going to be taken by surprise, and you're not going to be misrepresenting their view. You got a professor who laid it all out. So there's a value in here for you taking the course. Now, if I were writing a paper doing the assignment that you just described, I think I would be a little bit annoyed. And I mean, just maybe annoyed enough to say, pepper my paper with statements like, well, according to the professor such and so, or according to the syllabus, and therefore I am clearly I am simply reciting what another person's point of view is, rather than look at what he's forcing you to do is he's forcing you to make his case. Here's the way it was, and here are the reasons, QED, end of issue. And you don't believe that. So you could just do it like, according to this is the way it worked. And there you have it. The gospel according to Professor whatever, there it is. And so you're not owning it. You're just fulfilling the requirement. That'd be a way of doing it. Now, I do have a thought about the addendum that you put on. And maybe in the addendum that you're adding is you're accomplishing that according to the professor kind of purpose. But you might want to send it under a separate cover. If you include it with your paper, he may use that then to reflect negatively on your paper. And he might be able to construe it by saying, well, this was part of his paper, and so I'm going to subtract based on these remarks, even though you did double space and you said off the record kind of thing. If you turned in your paper and then turned in something else a day later to him as a reflection on the assignment, then I think it's going to be much more difficult for him to mark your paper down for something you said a day later. So it's just something you want to think about, and I'm trying to protect you.
Right.
Make sense?
No, that definitely makes sense. Because I can just tell, looking at the syllabus, that there's going to be a lot of papers that I have to write that are going to be pertaining to this issue, and that makes a lot of sense to protect myself.
Yeah.
That you can't kind of construe it as one long line of thought and kind of an incoherent idea, because the essay ends differently than it started.
Well, you may also, when you get to these others, Osiris, etc., be sure you're working with the primary source documentation. Okay, this is really important, and because it is easy to imagine parallels that don't exist. Have you seen the piece I wrote called "Recycle Redeemer"?
I may have. I've read a couple things on it. I can't remember if I read that one in particular.
I strongly urge you to get the article. It's called Recycle Redeemer by me. I don't know if it's on our website anymore. We've included it into a book of essays. So sometimes when we do that, we pull it off the website. But I have a suspicion that if you just troll around the internet with that search, you're going to find it somewhere. Recycle Redeemer by Greg Koulk. And in that, I talk about not only the factual problems of this thesis, but also the problems in reasoning, the rational mistakes that are being made with the claim that the myth of Jesus can be explained by parallel myths from an earlier time that are similar in a relevant way. And that if that's what you're going to be up against, it's good that you're prepared with this piece so that it will help you to ask the right questions in your discussions with the professor at class.
Right. No,
all right.
Definitely. Yeah. Every time I've noticed whenever people speak up, he just kind of discounts what they're saying by calling it Sunday school and moving on. If anyone.
Yes, that's an ad hominem.
Yeah.
That is a red herring, ad hominem, that is dismissal, that is ridicule.
You won't even entertain the ideas.
Well, wait, how about this? When he says, well, that's Sunday school, and you say, well, Professor, ridicule's not an argument, then see what he says. I mean, that may be daring for you, and you let the chips fall, but you don't have to be rude. Just say, wait a minute, Professor, ridicule's not an argument. What do you mean by that? Well, I brought up a legitimate point, and you ridiculed it as a Sunday school point, but you never answered it. So do you have an answer for it, or are you just going to ridicule it? The class would like to know.
Right.
So
yeah. I don't know, I'm trying to balance my academic career with wanting to kind of speak up for my faith, and I'm a little nervous if I do it. It may lead to unforeseen consequences.
I understand, and so you have to decide for yourself how you want to approach this. But notice that was a question that pertained to his claim. It is not a question that is advancing your faith.
Right.
Implicitly is meant to have an impact regarding your own convictions, but it is fully legitimate to raise a question and if he dismisses it by that's Sunday school, that's when it's fair, I think, to call him and say, well, Professor, that's not an answer. That's ridicule. Do you have an answer to the question or not? And that's not you advancing your faith. That is you asking for an answer to a question given to him. But again, you have to find your own comfort zone on that. So I'm just tossing it out there, and then you can decide what to do with that. Okay, Chris?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, got to run to break. I appreciate your call. I'm Greg Koulk here. Stay tuned for more on Stand to Reason.